We have been going through a study the last few weeks called Questions That Jesus Asked. And so today, here is the question for the day. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? Have you heard that before? Have you heard that before? Do you know the content in which that is asked? It's funny. As we discover these questions that Jesus asked, he asked these questions to get people thinking and make them look at themselves and do a little examination. And I got a feeling that this one that he threw out there got a little bit of a laughter or at least some kind of murmuring in response, because here he was making this incredible comparison of why would you look at a splinter of sawdust in your brother's eyes and you got a log in your eye. And growing up in a carpenter's home, he knew what he was talking about. And the words here, it compares the splinter to like a beam that you build a house with. And so this probably got a little reaction from people, like it actually should get from us. Now, do you remember the circumstances in which he delivered this question? Does anybody remember that? Where he was at, what he was doing? I'm going to tell you, just in case you didn't know, but I know some of you know that, but he was preaching the Sermon on the Mount. What we know as Sermon on the Mount, it's Matthew 5, 6, and 7. And I would really like to encourage you this week to read chapters Matthew 5, 6, and 7 at least once, if not every day, and you will discover what Jesus wanted that audience to hear about what God really wanted out of us, and to live life the very best way that God intended. God's ways are the best ways. And he wanted his hearers to hear that. And really, even back then, those teachings of the Sermon on the Mount were very, very radical. And just like they are today, because you read that and you go, really? Is that really what you meant? And it is. It's what he meant. And he just taught that God's expectations for living by faith was based on love versus the expectation of a religious system based on the law, which, by the way, had been manipulated by men for years and years and years. It really didn't resemble what God really wanted from people, okay? And so it's something we want to look at. And so what I'd like to do, before we get into this actual question, I'd like to go back and kind of give you a little brief overview of what he's already said so far in this sermon. What he's already said as he's talking to the people. And he starts off with what we have called the Beatitudes. Have you heard those, the Beatitudes? Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are those who are merciful, the meek, the peacemakers. He was giving the names he was listing the kinds of people that most likely got ran over in that world. Just kind of like sometimes I get run over here. The people who had a heart, the people who cared, the people who were kind of down. He said, blessed are you. You get it. That had to be very hard for everybody else to hear, but that's what he said. That thinking was radical. He also taught, after that, he brings up the whole idea of your motives actually may condemn you more than your actions, or at least your motives make you guilty just as your actions. And he said, you've heard it said that you should not murder. But I'm going to tell you, if you even hate, you have gone too far. I'm sure they didn't like hearing that any more than we like hearing that. He also said that that forgiveness was critical, that it was very important to forgive someone. Because if you didn't forgive someone, there's a very good chance you wouldn't be forgiven. That's pretty strong to say that. If you can't forgive, you may not receive forgiveness. He said, in this sermon, he said to love your enemies. Now that is really crazy thinking, isn't it? He told those people to love their enemies. Why would you want to love somebody who doesn't like you? But that's what he said. And then he actually took the time to expose the hypocrites, the people who put on a show, the people who said that they believed all this stuff but didn't really live out this stuff. It was just a showy thing, the religious people of the time. He taught the proper focus and the proper attitude to talk to God. He gave us a Lord's Prayer in the Sermon on the Mount. He said, if you want to talk to God, here's how you talk to God. And he gave us a model. He actually did talk about, Daniel mentioned it, our treasure. What really is and should be our treasure. And he did say a warning. Be careful, because if money becomes your treasure, You can't serve two masters. You cannot serve God and you cannot serve money. Then he goes into this passage this is the one I don't really like, because he says, do not worry. Have you guys got that one covered? He said, do not worry. You got nobody here. I don't need to say that one. Do not worry. Jesus said it. And those people then thought, what do you mean, do not worry? I don't even know how I'm going to eat tomorrow. But he said, do not worry. Wow. How are we doing with that one? So today's question comes right after he says, do not worry. Stop worrying. Because it doesn't really add anything. And the bottom line is, if you seek God, he's going to give you all this. So then he turns right around, and then this is what's next. Read along with me. It's in Matthew chapter 7, verses 1 through 5. It says, do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, here, let me take that speck out of your eye, when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite! First take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Now, how many of you have heard that one before? Okay, judges, do not judge. Matthew 7:1 is probably, I read this little article where it said it is actually the most quoted verse in the Bible. I thought John 3:16 would be that verse, but they said do not judge. As a matter of fact, it's even quoted by people who don't even believe in the Bible, right? You ever heard people say that to you? Hey, do not judge me, do not judge. And it's usually in the context of mind your own business, right? Do not judge. Or maybe it's just to deflect some criticism, or maybe it's to avoid confrontation, or maybe it's just to kind of promote the whole idea of we just need to tolerate everybody. Do not judge. Now, it's very important that when you look at this passage that you actually don't take out of context and you get what Jesus is saying here. So I thought I would actually look up that word, judge. And my grammar teacher taught me when you use it like this, it's a verb. So I didn't go to the noun, I went to the verb part. Aren't you proud of me for that one? Okay. I went to the verb, and this is what it said. To judge. Actually has a variety of meanings. And actually, I didn't write them all down. This is just the ones that I wanted to use today. Very selective. Here we go. To hear and pass judgment on persons in cases in a court of law. To judge. To determine the winner of a contest or settle a controversy. Okay, to judge. That would be to judge. Like umpires, I would never want to be an umpire. I have a lot of respect for them, but I never hardly agree with them. Umpires and referees. Got myself in trouble once or twice. I better not go there. Okay. The next one. To form an idea, opinion, or estimate about any matter or person. And then the last one, to criticize or censor. So, we have our choice there. And when Jesus said, do not judge, it's interesting that he said this and it was written down by Matthew in the Greek language. And in the Greek language, which I actually took one year, but I'm not going to say a lot about it because I really couldn't go there very far with you. But the Greek language, this same word that in Matthew 7:1 is the same word that we get our English word critic. Okay? So I'm going to tell you which one we land on here is the idea of to criticize or to censor. There's a big difference between discerning what is right or wrong or what's good or what's bad and having this critical, condemning, censorious, judgmental attitudes towards others. So I want us to think about that. And before we go any further, though, I want to ask Todd Calloway to join me. Todd is someone who actually gets paid to judge people. He is a magistrate and in Dayton area.
Montgomery County, juvenile court.
And he works in a juvenile court there. And so I've asked him to come and talk to us a little bit about what it's like to really judge people. So, Todd, I want to ask you, as a magistrate, as a judge, what guidelines or standards do you use to make judgments in the cases that you hear and oversee?
Well, on any given day, I hear lots of cases, and I'm bound by or controlled by statutes, rules, regulations. But if you were to boil it down to one simple rule or element, would be I do things that are in the best interest of the child. Even if I'm dealing with the delinquency, custody case, anything like that, I generally try to make my decisions based on the best interest of the child. What's going to be the best for this child now and in the long run.
Okay. So when you listen to a case, what do you look for, listen for, as each side or each situation presents itself?
Well, I work for two judges. I'm a magistrate. I work for two judges, and one of the judges I work for, he's done it a long time, and he just says, give me information. Anybody who's in front of me, whether or not be a caseworker, or a parent, or even the kid, give me as much information as possible, because the more information I have, the more informed of a decision I can make. And so I really am just, as I sit there and listen to people talk, arguments being made, I just try to gather information so I can make an informed decision.
Okay. So as you're making this informed decision, are you ever tempted to kind of draw those conclusions before you hear all the information?
Pretty much every single time. It's natural, right? Somebody comes into a courtroom. I was talking to my wife, Kristen, about this. And, when I first got started, I had a kid in my courtroom, and he came in, and he sits down, and we get done with the case, and he was kind of wearing a ratty T-shirt. And I said to him, as we finished, I said, next time you come to court, please come a little more dressed appropriately for court. And he looks at me, and he said, this is my only shirt. I was like, ugh, all right. So, I drawn a judgment on him just based on his appearance, and it stuck with me to this day that you'd never know what's coming in front of you and everything. So, yeah, it's natural to do it, but as I've done this job for a while, you learn just to take your time, get information, like I said, and try to make that informed decision without jumping to those conclusions.
So, do you ever get concerned that you're going to kind of interject your own personal opinions as you make judgments?
I think it's inevitable that I do that. Everything I do is first screened through the juvenile rules and the statutes. Next thing it's probably screened through the filter through is my judge's philosophy. We have a court philosophy. I work for the judge, so whatever the judge wants me to do is generally how I see things. But the third filter is my personal experience. Half of the time when I first became a magistrate, I wasn't a parent, but now I am a parent. And so those life things change how you filter things and how you decide things and how you work through things. So it's inevitable to do that, but, priority comes with the law and my judges and everything, and the best of my ability. I try to keep personal things out, but it's inevitable.
Okay, so do you feel like you always get to the truth, or have you ever been wrong?
To admit I'm wrong. Yes, of course I'm wrong. I get things wrong, but I do feel like at the end of the day, if I have enough information and I've made an informed decision, that whether or not I'm right or wrong are shades of gray. Now, as far as truth is concerned, it's two different things, right? One of my roles as a magistrate is I'm a fact finder, meaning that, like, if I have a trial, I'm trying to determine what I think happened and then apply it to the law. So do I think every time I'm considering facts that I get what happened right? No way. There's no way. I mean, I can't possibly figure out what happened every single time. But do I think I have a good enough grasp on it that I'm making an informed decision? Sure.
Okay. One last question. What motivates you to put yourself in a position where you are actually judging other people?
He gave me this question beforehand, so I had a chance to think about it.
Good setup.
And I thought it's a great question, right? And I think the thing that motivates me is to be fair. When I retire, when I'm done being a magistrate, if whoever appeared in front of me says, you were fair, then I'm pretty good about it. And the example I gave is I had an individual in front of me. I was covering a case. It was a custody case, which I don't normally do. And I ruled against this father. He did not get the result that he wanted. But he came up to me after the hearing and he thanked me, and I said, what are you thanking me for? Did you not hear me right? And he just said, no, I'm glad I got to speak in your court. I got my day in court. And that's what he wanted. He wanted to be heard. He wanted to make sure that he had his day in court, so I felt like it was being fair. And, one of the things that's ironic about what I do is I find that the best judges are the ones that are least judgmental, meaning the ones that kind of keep themselves out of rendering judgment on the people in front of them or things that they've done. Just apply the law and do that in a manner which is fair. I think that's what motivates me, is to do that.
All right. Thank you, Todd. I appreciate him getting up here and sharing with us. And some things to think about there. I think it's really important for us to consider. How do we judge other people? How do we look? Because we all do it. Let's admit it. It's been an issue since the beginning of human existence. And as you look around, it's pretty obvious there's still a lot of judging going on, whether it's, watching TV or looking at the political environment or looking at, just what's going on between races, between gender. We tend to judge by age. Actually, I'm kind of one of those people I'm kind of tired of hearing about being a baby boomer and Gen X and millennials. I mean, people are people. Let's look at people and look at individuals and really try to look at them as a person and not categorize them or stereotype them and put them in everybody else. But we do like to label, don't we? We like to look at people and maybe draw a conclusion by their appearance or where they live or what they do for a living or all those kinds of things. I'll never forget when I used to help out at Anderson High School. I'd go over every Wednesday and sit with a group of kids and it was called The Room. And they'd come in. We'd just talk about what a topic came up that day. It started out as a place to come for supporting drug and alcohol issues, but just turned into this place to have conversations. And the one day we actually got to talking about this, the idea of judging people. And that was back in the 90s, so I'm old, but that's part of it. And this girl was sitting in there, and she's usually very quiet. And she dressed in what, at that time, I don't know if it's still going on, is the goth look. You know what I'm talking about, the goth look? Where the long black trench coats, the real pale makeup, the bright lips, the black hair. And just actually, I judged her. I thought, she's kind of spooky. And I didn't mean to do that. But I sat there and I was just listening to us talk about this conversation. And she said, it's interesting. A lot of people judge me. They think they know who I am. They think they know what I'm about. They think they know what I'm like. She says, I get asked if I do drugs. I get asked if I go to parties. I ask if I, what I do and all that kind of stuff. And the truth is, I'm a National Honor Society. I've never drank. I've never smoked. I've never done drugs at all. I just wanted to look like this. And she kind of did it for conversation piece. But yet, conclusions were drawn. Judgments were made. And there is a big, big difference between having a critical, condemning, censorious, judgmental attitude towards others and discerning the difference between right and wrong. And I think it's really important that we keep that in mind as we look at people. Because human nature really has not changed since Jesus delivered this message on that mountainside many years ago. So, I think these words are just as important for us to hear as they were then. Because people matter to God. People should matter to us. I want to read that passage again out of what I found this book and got recommended this book and for kind of studying the Word. And it's called The New Testament, an Expanded Translation by Kenneth Wuest. And what he's done is sometimes your translations that you get, they try to keep it as brief as possible and just keep the text flowing. He calls this his expanded translation, and he says he takes as many words as it takes to explain the point from Greek. Because, like we said, sometimes when you take one language and translate a word into another language, there's not always words that match up, right? You can do that in a lot of languages. I'm not sure what that is in this language, so we just kind of throw a word out there. And so this is what he calls his expanded translation. I just want to read a couple of the verses from this passage in what he did it. He said, because first he just actually says, stop pronouncing censorious criticism in order that you may not be the object of censorious criticism. So he goes right there. It's talking about being critical of people. It's not talking about judging and discerning things. Because actually, if you just go up to verse 6, right after verse 5, He actually says, watch out for those dogs and swine, and don't cast your pearls before them, type thing. Jesus called people pigs and dogs. So you got to be careful. He's not saying, he's saying watch out. As a matter of fact, a little later in the chapter, you go down further, he says, watch out for those false teachers, those wolves. And he said, you know how you're going to be able to tell those people? By their fruit. By their fruit. You're going to be able to look at people, and their fruit is going to let you know their heart and their motives. So he says, so he goes right in to stop with a censorious criticism. Then he goes on to say the but. But he goes, later on he said, oh, how is it that you will say to your brother, permit me to draw out the splinter from your eye, and behold the log that is in your eye? Then he goes, oh, actor on the stage of life. What word did we read earlier? Hypocrite. The word, he defines it, oh, actor on the stage of life. Hypocrites basically are pretenders. They're actors. They're people that aren't real. They're people that will just do whatever they need to do, and they don't really believe it. They just do it. He just calls them, you're a hypocrite if you're out there judging people and looking at their faults and not looking in the mirror at your own faults. And it's important to remember this, because being critical is a whole lot different than being discerning. And being critical and judgmental makes you critical and judgmental. As a matter of fact, judging doesn't say as much about the person as it says about you. He also says, don't be, and Jesus said, just stop it. Stop being critical. And he says, don't be a hypocrite. You got to look in the mirror. First consider your own motives, and before you even dare to help other people. And it does, your attitude does matter. We need to be empathetic, humble. We need to show mercy and have compassion. And why? Because it is very dangerous for us to judge people, even just like Todd was sharing with us, because we may be wrong. We don't know all the facts. We don't know all the angles. We don't know all the temptations that somebody is dealing with and all the things that are going on in their life. We draw conclusions. We don't know. We could be wrong. That's part of the human nature. We don't know motives. It's hard for us to figure out motives. So it's hard. So why judge people when you may not even know their true motives? Because we are never going to be free from our own prejudice. We all have our own issues. So be careful of how you look at other people and what you say to them. And when you do that, when you do judge, you basically are putting yourself in God's position, which is a very dangerous thing to do. Jesus, the brother of James, the brother of Jesus, he said it this way: brothers and sisters, do not slander one another. Anyone who speaks against a brother or sister or judges them speaks against the law and judges it. When you judge the law, you are not keeping it, but sitting in judgment on it. There's only one lawgiver and judge, the one who's able to save and destroy. But you, who are you to judge your neighbor? Have you ever thought of how different your life would be if you just could not judge people? And what would that bring to you? What would that be? And I'm assuming, I guess I shouldn't assume everybody else does this, but I know that I do this. As a matter of fact, this was really hard to get ready for. When we were dividing up topics, and I said, hey, I'll take that one. That should be easy. And the more I got involved in getting ready for today, I said, the more tempted I was to judge people because things were happening. I'm going, oh man, I can't believe that. I can't believe that person did this. I found myself being guilty of the very thing I was saying, I can't get up there and talk about this without at least admitting it. As a matter of fact, Josh Rutledge and I and Daniel were talking before the service about what would your life be different if you should stop judging. And Josh made the comment, and I hope he doesn't mind me saying this, because it'd probably be true for me too. He says, I probably wouldn't talk about half as much as I talk. I'd be a lot more quieter. You might be. You might find that very peaceful, actually. And I think you'd also find out you'd have a lot less stress. I think you'd find out that you have more friends. And I think you might look over your shoulder less. And I think you might just experience more peace. Like I said, be careful to judge, because judging defines who you are. It doesn't define the people you judge nearly as much as it defines you. There's an old poem that puts it this way: there is so much good in the worst of us, and so much bad in the best of us, that it hardly behooves any of us to talk about the rest of us. So what should we do? Because it is kind of a natural, but there are things we can do that will replace that. Because when you take away something, you probably should put something else in its place. Or it just kind of will come back. And what I think we should do is we should love one another in a sincere and a humble and merciful way. Jesus went on in that passage just a few verses later in verse 12 to say, so in everything do to others what you would have them do to you. For this sums up the law and the prophets. Treat other people the way that you would like to be treated. And that goes a long way. Jesus came to bring a new kingdom into this world. Not an earthly kingdom, but an amazing spiritual kingdom with the promise of being with him forever. And the night before he was betrayed and crucified, he got his disciples, his followers in a room, and he shared this word. He said, I have a new command. This is a new command. This is not what they lived under. This was not the way it worked. This is a new command, and this is what it is. He said, a new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. I would encourage you to take the time to look up the one another verses in the Bible. You can Google that, one another verses, and it pops right up. There's several. Forgiving one another, accepting one another, be kind and compassionate to one another, encourage one another, submit to one another, live in harmony with one another, bear with one another, carry one another's burdens, love each other deeply, spur one another on to love and good works. I think we really need each other in this. If we're not going to judge, we've got to do something. So why not love one another? Because you know what? Jesus said, that's how the world is going to know you're my disciples, by the way you love. Not by what you know, but how you love one another. That's what Jesus said. Why do we expect people who have nothing to do with Jesus to get that? But for those of us who know Jesus, we should get that loud and clear. We have got something that the world needs, and the way they're going to see it is by the way we love one another. And I believe with all my heart, if we love one another, we will live at peace. Doesn't everybody just want to have peace? What do we want? World peace. We want peace. And I believe if we learn to love one another, we will experience peace. Paul met Jesus on the road to Damascus. Here's a guy who put himself in a position to judge. He was going out, finding people who believed in Jesus and killing them. He had put himself as a judge and jury and executioner. And on the road to Damascus, he met Jesus and his life changed. And that's why he could write to the Romans who were believers this verse. And I really encourage you to read all of chapter 12, but this verse in chapter 18 has been particularly on my mind a lot this last couple of years and the last few months even more and more. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Don't wait for everybody else to live at peace. Live at peace. Do what you need to do to live at peace with other people. We need to live at peace. The next thing we need to do is we need to look for good. We need to look for the good in people. There's a lot of people looking for the not good in people. We need to look for the good in people. And then we need to do something to encourage that. Paul wrote to the church in Galatia this. He said, let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all people, especially to those in the family of believers. Do not give up. Do not get tired. Do good, and do good for one another, especially the family of believers. We should love one another like nobody else does. It should be so attractive, people want to be a part of it. And the last thing I want you to think about, live at peace, look for good, love like Jesus. I want you to love like Jesus. And you need to read the gospel so you know how Jesus loved people. Jesus loved people. He didn't judge people. He looked at them and saw them through a whole different eye that the world saw each other. He looked at people and he saw their heart. I think we can do that a lot more than we do, even though we'll never be able to do it like Jesus. I understand that. But we can look at people differently, love like Jesus, sacrificial, unconditional. It is possible. It is the best way. That's how the world know that we're his disciples, by the way we love one another.